So we next pick up documents which provide information about pool sizes and donor procedures. In 1983, if we go to ARMO 40243, this is a Revlon Healthcare Group Inter-Office Memorandum dated the 27th of April 1983, and we can see the subject is TRIP Report Plasma Alliance Reviews, and it's from S.H. Muller, and it records as follows in the first paragraph. On April the 20th to 22nd, 1983, I visited 5 Plasma Alliance centres in Indiana and Ohio. Each centre was toured physically, and basic operating and documentation systems were reviewed at each. Plasma Alliance's current programme for screening donors who are at high risk re-AIDS was discussed with the centre managers. And then we see that the centres visited were West Lafayette, Indianapolis, Columbus, Akron, and Cleveland. Overview, each of the centres we visited was clean, well organised and quite professional in appearance. The personnel I met were knowledgeable and aware of current regulatory issues. The centre's operations conform to current regulatory requirements. Appropriate controls are in place to assure donor safety and product quality. Screen out inappropriate potential donors, prevent overly frequent donations, and to limit overbleeding. So that's the overall assessment, what's said to be a satisfactory picture. And then if we look at the next paragraph, it refers to the Plasma Alliance centres being, and this is the fourth line, regularly audited by Knoxville QA. And then the last sentence of that paragraph, it's certainly worth noting that PA's, so Plasma Alliance's FDA inspectional track record recently has been excellent. Facilities, equipment, the centres we visited, and you'll recall there were 5 of them, are located either adjacent to university campuses or in near downtown areas. All of the locations appeared to be acceptable, i.e. the neighbourhood seemed relatively stable and did not evidence adverse street activities. Top of the next page says the donors we saw were both students and neighbourhood residents. And then if we go down to the bottom of the page, we can see under the heading Operations/Documentation, all of the centres visited were using uniform procedures in compliance with PA policies and SOPs, so standard operating procedures. New donors are photographed up after presenting adequate identification and receive a pre-donation physical exam, at which time informed consent is obtained. Repeat donors are identified via their filed photographs. In locations where other plasmapheresis operations exist nearby, centres exchange information concerning permanently rejected donors and also use a UV fluorescent finger stain to detect and prevent overly frequent multi-centre donations. All donors are screened on each visit for blood pressure, pulse, weight, temperature, hematocrit, evidence of drug abuse, and symptoms of hepatitis or other diseases which would affect ability to donate. Long-term donors receive annual physical examinations. Just pausing there, of course, this is describing procedures as at the April 1983, when, as is clear from this document, they are alive to the issue of AIDS. So it isn't necessarily a reflection of the procedures that might have been adopted in previous years. I don't think we know one way or another. And then in relation to the passage we just looked at, what we don't get from this, perhaps unsurprisingly, is it's a report just of a TRIP report, is a description of how this screening is undertaken. So we're told, for example, that donors are screened for evidence of drug abuse or symptoms of hepatitis, but it doesn't tell us how that screening is undertaken. Third paragraph on that page then refers to the documentation system, and it said that the documentation system employed by Plasma Alliance is excellent, and the centres demonstrated uniform adherence, and further details is given in relation to that. Next paragraph, two paragraphs further down, records that each centre was found to maintain a daily log of rejected donors. And then we have a heading AIDS. Plasma Alliance has implemented a programme to screen out high-risk donors per current FDA requirements. A fact sheet concerning AIDS has been posted in each of the screening booths. Donor product cards now include a screening question to determine whether a donor is in a high-risk group. Also, each donor is being asked to sign a questionnaire verifying that they've read the AIDS fact sheet and that they do not belong to a high-risk group. The signed questionnaire is being kept in the donor record folder. Each of the centre managers I spoke with thought that the programme was working reasonably well. Each reported that some donors have voluntarily eliminated themselves from the programme. The screening questionnaire has not caused any adverse donor response and in fact apparently has engendered some serious conversations about AIDS among donors and potential donors. Centre managers advised that in some cases they personally spoke to donors who they suspected of being in a high-risk group after the donors signed the questionnaire to the contrary, and these donors also voluntarily withdrew. I was quite impressed by the sensitive fashion in which centre managers are approaching this task. Again, we'll look in more detail at some of the ways in which the risk of AIDS was responded to by pharmaceutical companies. But you'll note that this is what's being described by April 1983, and you may wish to consider in comparison what was happening in the United Kingdom at that stage in transfusion centres. We know that the leaflet, for example, was not, the first leaflet was not in operation at this point in time, and not for some months until the 1st of September 1983. So it may provide a degree of contrast in that respect. So that's that 1983 report. If we then pick matters up with BART 40863, BART, 40863. This is a letter dated the 19th of May 1983 from Armour to all haemophilia centre directors. And we can see it said in the first paragraph, the Armour Pharmaceutical Company is acutely aware of the current concern of the medical world regarding AIDS and its possible implication to haemophilia care and treatment. Despite the fact that there is little evidence to associate plasma component therapy with the transmission of AIDS, you may wish to consider in due course whether you think that's an accurate characterisation of the state of knowledge as at May of 1983. Armour, through its affiliate organisation Plasma Alliance, has had programmes in operation for several months which have been designed to help prevent the utilisation of plasma obtained from members of high-risk groups associated with AIDS in the production of clotting factor concentrate.
I mean, just pausing there, if in truth there is little evidence, there was nonetheless, it would appear, enough to persuade Armour that it should take that action.
Yes, indeed. And if we go over the page, we can pick matters up in the second paragraph, which refers to data reported by CGC in May 1983, indicate that since the initial cases were reported, approximately 1,500 cases of AIDS have occurred. Of even more alarming nature is the increased rate of incidence of reporting. An accession rate of 100 patients per month appears to be current. Approximately 40% of the reported AIDS patients have died, so knowledge there of the high mortality rate. We can then pick issues up relating to Armour's plasma collection processes in the bottom paragraph of the page, where it says this, of additional concern to Armour Pharmaceutical Company and to others in the healthcare field is the indication from data generated by the CDC that AIDS is being seen in recipients of blood components and blood derivatives. In a summary presentation made in May 1983, the CDC stated that 14 haemophiliacs have apparently contracted AIDS, and that an as yet unidentified number of non-haemophilic recipients of blood and blood components also have developed the syndrome. The CDC is investigating the possible relationship between AIDS and the use of blood and blood derivatives, and is attempting to determine whether transmission of AIDS via transfusion is indeed occurring. And then if we go to the next page, we can then see identification of what's said to be the high-risk groups, homosexual or bisexual males, drug abusers, immigrants from Haiti. And then there's a discussion of those groups having a high incidence of hepatitis B infection. And you'll see in the second paragraph, again, these are issues that we'll be returning to. There's reference to the possibility of testing for laboratory markers of hepatitis B. And then if we pick matters up, which wasn't at this point in time being implemented, if we pick matters up then at the bottom of the page under the heading Plasma Collection and Utilisation by Armour Pharmaceutical Company USA, Armour Pharmaceutical Company USA, through its subsidiary Plasma Alliance, operates 16 centres located in the Midwest and Southeast portions of the United States. I'm not entirely sure why we've gone from 22 to 16 centres over the preceding couple of years. None of these centres are located in the AIDS high incidence areas of the country, New York City, Miami, San Francisco, Los Angeles, mentioned earlier, nor is plasma used in the manufacture of clotting factor products obtained from facilities located in these areas. Furthermore, no plasma is obtained from collection facilities located outside of the United States. Nevertheless, the AIDS issue cannot be treated solely on the basis of geography, since incidence of the syndrome is scattered over a wide area. And then we see set out the steps that Armour is telling the Haemophilia Centre directors it's been taking the first of several steps designed to avoid collecting plasma from members of groups shown to be at high risk for contracting AIDS. Informational posters were displayed at our centres in December 1982. These posters advised potential donors about AIDS and its possible impact on the treatment of haemophilia, and requested donors in any of these groups to defer themselves from plasma donation. So that's what's said to be the first step. We then see the next step in the following paragraph. In February 1983, a more aggressive programme was initiated following discussions with organisations such as the US FDA Office of Biologics, the National Haemophilia Foundation, the Centres for Disease Control, and other commercial manufacturers of clotting factor concentrates. This programme included direct communication with each donor in the form of written and oral information and questions, designed to defer from the donor population individuals at risk for contracting AIDS. Each donor is presented a fact sheet describing the high-risk groups thus far identified with AIDS, the seriousness of the syndrome, and the possible link to the treatment of haemophilia. Furthermore, all donors are questioned by trained processors as to their being members of high-risk groups, and as to the presence of any signs, night sweats, diarrheas, chills, etc., that might be indicative of AIDS. Donors are required to affirm in writing that they are not members of any of the several high-risk groups involved, without having to reveal any facet of their personal and private lives. Periodic physical examinations performed by plasma centre attending physicians also include evaluations for possible signs and symptoms of AIDS. We'll continue to move forward in cooperation with other responsible segments of the healthcare team, both governmental and non-governmental, to implement additional plasma collection activities and programmes deemed to be effective and appropriate. And then if we look at the bottom of the page, it says this: the plasma collection actions described earlier in this statement are designed to prevent the use of plasma obtained from individuals in one or more of several high-risk groups in the production of clotting factor concentrates. They are predicated on the possibility that AIDS may be transmitted through blood and certain blood derivatives, although it must be re-emphasised that no agent responsible for transmission has yet been identified. However, one must consider that an infectious organism may be involved, and the appearance of AIDS is prevalent in groups with high incidence of hepatitis. There is then reference to heat treatment in the following paragraph. And then the last paragraph says the Revlon Healthcare Group, of which Armour Pharmaceutical Company is a member, is firmly committed to providing safe and effective products to the medical community, and will continue to devote considerable time and attention to the problems associated with AIDS and haemophilia treatment and to efforts undertaken to resolve them. We believe that given the level of today's knowledge regarding AIDS and its transmission, the programmes in place at our plasma collection centres provide an effective way to reduce the potential for use of plasma obtained from high-risk groups. And as we saw from the first page of this letter, it was sent to all haemophilia centre directors and was, you may infer, designed to provide a degree of reassurance in the hope that haemophilia centre directors would continue to use Armour products. It's around this time that there are a series of requests for information from the Department of Health to Armour, and indeed to other pharmaceutical companies, about issues relating to donors and donor selection procedures, and indeed plasma supply. We don't have a complete set of documents at present, but we can start, I think, at ARMO 40260. This is a Telex dated the 16th of June 1983, the date's at the very bottom of the document, from the Department of Health Services Division to Armour Pharmaceuticals. And we can see it starts by saying, re-telecon of 15th of June 1983, so there'd been some form of telephone discussion. Please supply following information urgently by return telex if possible. And then there are a series of questions. Does your company manufacture coagulation factor concentrates for use in the UK? If yes, name the products and state how much of each is supplied annually. 2, from which country or countries is the source plasma obtained? 3, if from the USA, is all plasma collected at FDA-licensed plasma collection centres? Please give the names of the centres and their locations. 4, if non-USA plasma is used, name the countries involved and state whether the plasma collection centres in these countries are licensed by the national regulatory authorities. 5, are you able to identify the origin of the plasma included in each batch of final product and the date on which it was collected? 6, is the plasma from each collection centre fractionated separately, or is the plasma from several collection centres pooled prior to processing? 7, if the plasma is of USA origin, are you able to supply final products which do not contain plasma from the major epidemic areas for AIDS, e.g. New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Miami? 8, can you confirm that all plasma of USA origin in your products is being collected in conformity with the FDA directive of the 23rd of March 1983? 9, did your company institute in advance of the FDA requirements any special precautions to be taken by plasma collection centres in respect of AIDS? If so, what were these precautions and when were they introduced? 10, if USA plasma is used, are you able to confirm that all future supplies of coagulation factor concentrates to be sold in the UK will be manufactured from plasma collected in accordance with the FDA directive of 28th of March 1983, or in accordance with the special precautions, if any, instituted by your company at an earlier date? And then 11, if the answer to 10 is no, from what date can you meet this requirement? So those are those were the questions posed by the Department of Health. I'm just going to go through the correspondence in chronological order. If we go next to ARMO 40264, this is from Mr. Tarbit of Armour to Dr. Riddell, so from Armour UK to Armour in the US. It's dated the 20th of June 1983. And it says, thank you for your comprehensive telex responding to the questions raised by our DHSS. Now, we don't, unfortunately, at the moment have or haven't been able to locate that telex. But in any event, this is a request for some further bits and pieces of information. So Mr. Tarbit continues, we would appreciate your comment on the following points arising from these responses, together with certain other additional queries which we've now received from the Supplies Division of the DHSS. 1, should we assume that all haemophiliacs developing AIDS have received Factor VIII as well as other products? 2, your telex indicates that new procedures were implemented in February, which conflicts with earlier information we had received stating that these started in October/November 1982. Could you please clarify? 3, with respect to the donor identified in your telex, it is not clear whether this donor is now no longer giving plasma. We would like to know whether any of the batches identified have been supplied to our market. 4, we understand that plasma may be sourced from centres other than those of our Plasma Alliance group, and would like further information on these, particularly with reference to their frequency of use, name and location in respect to recognised high-risk areas. We assume that any such centres will be FDA approved and subject to corporate audit periodically. 5, we would be interested in information on the effect the more stringent screening procedures have had on the donor panel in terms of deferment, and if known, the comparable effect on donors of other manufacturers. In view of the situation, we would be grateful to receive urgent responses to these queries. And then the next letter, or the next telex, is the 21st of June, and it's ARMO 40266. So we can see the date, 21st of June. This is from HL Shaw, and I think that's who it's from. Yeah, and it says this. Thank you for your...
Well, if it's from HL Shaw, why is it copied to HL Shaw?
I don't know. If we go to the second page, it's quite difficult to...
It looks as though it is, yes.
Yeah.
Curious.
It is curious.
Anyway, somebody else has written that on. So that may be why, I think.
Yes. HL Shaw was based in Armour and Eastbourne, so with the Armour Pharmaceutical Company in the UK, as I understand it. But as you say, someone else has written that on. So this is 21st of June 1983. And then we can see, well, it says, thank you for your telex of the 16th of June on the above subject. So it's a response to the DHSS queries. Certain of the specific questions you ask require responses in more detail than the information we have available, and these have been referred to our associate company in the USA for more comprehensive responses. These latter will be transmitted to you as soon as they're available to us. In the interim, our responses to the points you raise are as follows. 1, our company manufactures Factor VIII concentrate, trade names Factor VIII and high potency Factor VIII in the USA, and these products are imported and sold in the UK. Approximate annual sales of these products are as follows, and we can see the figures there set out. 15 to 20 million international units of Factor VIII, 1 to 1.5 million international units of high potency Factor VIII. 2, source plasma is of USA origin, and processing of this to the finished product also takes place in the USA. 3, all plasma is collected at FDA licensed centres. Routinely, all plasma used is collected at plasmapheresis centres owned by Plasma Alliance, which, as with Armour Pharmaceutical, is a subsidiary of the Revlon Healthcare Group. These centres are located as follows. And then we have a list of them: Akron, Atlanta, Chattanooga, Cleveland, Dayton, Knoxville, Lexington, Louisville, Nashville, Oklahoma, Omaha, West Lafayette, University of Minnesota, and St. Paul. On occasions, plasma has also been obtained from other FDA licensed centres. So it does appear that Armour was not entirely self-sufficient in the sense of receiving plasma only from its Plasma Alliance centres, at least according to this document. We're seeking further information on the names and locations of these centres from the USA. And then if we go over the page, 4, only USA plasma is used. 5, we believe that the comprehensive labelling and record requirements of the FDA Code of Federal Regulations and the additional corporate in-house requirements per MIT identification of the origin of plasma included in this batch to specific donor level as well as centre. Confirmation of this is awaited from the USA. 6, plasmapherized plasma is collected from the Plasma Alliance centres and processed at Armour Pharmaceutical Company, Kankakee, Illinois. We believe that plasma from several centres is used in the production of a batch of material. 7, none of the Plasma Alliance centres are located in any of the areas associated with high risk of AIDS transmission. We believe this to be also the case with other centres used by the company. Thus, our Factor VIII products will not contain material derived from plasma collected in these areas. 8, we confirm that all plasma used in the production of our blood products is now collected in conformity with the FDA directive of March the 23rd, 1983. We believe that a full programme of special precautions regarding screening procedures and dissemination of information to donors was initiated in our Plasma Alliance centres in February of this year. Before that time, information on the risk of AIDS had been relayed to donors by means of posters displayed in the collection centres since October/November 1982, although the revised screening procedures have not been finalised and implemented. Confirmation of this is being sought from the USA. 10, we believe that all future supplies of our products, Factor VIII and high-potency Factor VIII, sold in the UK will have been processed from plasma collected under the new procedures. So that's the response to the DHSS questions. And then if we go to ARMO 40263, this is a further Telex. I think the date of this is the 23rd of June 1983. There's certainly a stamp to that effect in the top right-hand corner. It's not entirely clear, but in any event, it's a response to the further questions in the Telex of the 20th of June. And I think it would appear to be from Dr. Riddell. The following is in response to your Telex of the 6th of the 20th, 1983. 1, information furnished by the Centres for Disease Control indicates that those haemophiliacs diagnosed as having contracted AIDS have received multiple products, including cryo, from multiple sources. There does not appear to be any instance in which a haemophiliac patient received one product exclusively. We're not certain as to whether each of them indeed received one product exclusively. We are not certain as to whether each of them indeed received Factor VIII concentrate as part of haemophilia treatment, but assume such a likelihood. 2, I cannot comment on information given to you earlier as to when procedures were implemented in Plasma Alliance centres. The centres in December 1980, I think there might be a word missing, sorry, after Plasma Alliance centres.
There's something there,
yes.
and it doesn't read on easily.
Yes. The centres in December 1982, and that more formal steps were taken in February 1983 are correct to the best of my knowledge. That would be consistent with what was set out in that letter to haemophilia centre directors in May 1983, which said posters in December 1982, and then screening procedures in February. Please bear in mind that industry discussions as to action steps did not begin until December 1982. The donor discussed in my earlier Telex has not participated in our plasmapheresis programme since late February 1983. Factor VIII concentrate derived from pools containing units of plasma from this individual have been distributed domestically and have been exported. Some of this material did go to the UK. 4, Armour Pharmaceutical Company uses only plasma collected by the Plasma Alliance centres in the manufacture of Factor VIII concentrate. To that extent, we are unique among all other manufacturers who rely upon outside source material quite heavily. So it appears to be being asserted by Dr. Riddell or by Armour in the US that in fact Plasma Alliance does supply the entirety of the plasma. 5, within our own organisation, over 150 individuals have deferred themselves since the AIDS programme was initiated in February 1983. I must point out that Plasma Alliance centres are not located in any of the hotspots associated with AIDS, i.e. New York, Florida or California. Alpha Therapeutic Corporation has stated that over 400 individuals have deferred themselves. I've no data from other manufacturers. So that's the further information supplied to Armour UK by Armour in the US. There is, then if we move to later in 1983, a Telex at ARMO 40302. The date of this is the 4th of November 1983. It's to Mr. Bishop, so it's addressed to Armour in the UK. It's from looks like I. Regier. I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head who that is. It refers in the first part of it to a recall of products by Qatar. Qatar recalled 16 AHF lots distributed to 33 countries, including Japan. Several other lots are on hold. One of Qatar's plasma donors recently died because of AIDS. The man donated about 5 litres of plasma over the time, but apparently failed to indicate any information about his disease during that time. We will probably have to expect very detailed questions regarding donor screening / selection of donors during the BGA hearing at, I'm not quite sure what that next word is.
Berlin, is it?
It probably is, and that would make sense.
Well, that would stand with BGA.
It would indeed, which is the effectively the German regulatory or licensing body. I am also concerned about suggestions that paid donors are less likely to be truthful when asked questions which would disqualify them as donors. Under the circumstances, I suggest that we have a meeting, and then a suggested date is given prior to what's described as the BPI meeting at the Hotel Kempinski. The Qatar incident is under investigation now, and Dr. Riddell will have detailed information available for our meeting. We regret the unfortunate circumstances of the Qatar incident. However, the possibility of something like that happening to any plasma manufacturer cannot be excluded. It should be to our advantage to remind our customers in an appropriate form that Armour processes plasma from our wholly owned and fully controller plasmapheresis centre.
Must be fully controlled, I would think.
Yes, I think there are a handful of typographical errors in the Telex. Yeah. I think that must be what was intended. Plasma Alliances has a worldwide reputation for excellent quality and higher standards. Although it is obvious that it is actually not known how to avoid, that should be not known, how to avoid transmission of AIDS, it should also be emphasised that we have recently introduced Factor 8 HT, heat treated, to improve the safety of our product. We will keep you informed on this matter and would appreciate any feedback. So that's November 83. And then if we go to CGRA 40319. This is a Qatar internal memorandum dated the 13th of March 1984, and it refers to a meeting held on the 6th of March, and you'll see that there were attendees from a number of different pharmaceutical companies, including in relation to Armour, Dr. Mike Riddell. And you'll see under the heading in summary that for discussion at the meeting was the question of beginning hepatitis B core antibody testing of source plasma donors. It says, following 5 hours of discussion, a vote was taken. 3 are identified as voting in favour. All others, with the exception of 1 who abstained, were not in favour. If we go to the bottom of the page, and I'm really just going to pick up what was said by Dr. Riddell, reflecting his role with Armour. It says, immediately prior to the conclusion of our meeting, it was recommended that the industry should refrain from starting anti-HBC testing. Carr was adamant that Alpha would not begin. Riddell said Armour would not use the test unless a competitor was using it to competitive advantage. And then it continues in relation to representatives of other companies. If we go to the third page, sorry, actually, if we pick it up, top of the second page, first of all, my apologies. Under the heading General Comments, it says, after an introductory / background statement, Riddell asked that each of us give comments and thoughts on anti-HBC testing. At both the original statement and subsequent comments by each attendee in the order presented are summarised. And then we have contributions, again, from various different individuals. If we go to the bottom of the third page, we will see what was recorded in this Qatar memorandum as being said by Dr. Riddell. Questions if anti-HBC test is sufficiently specific to be effective, it would exclude only 50% of donors with AIDS prodrome. provided figures showing anti-HBC testing and rejecting of positive donors should cost several $1 million per year. 14 to 15 Plasma Alliance centres collecting about 850,000 litres per year. Armour currently derives all plasma from Plasma Alliance, no contract centres. So obviously the last two sentences pick up upon the question of what the sources of plasma were used by Armour, and it appears to be said it's entirely Plasma Alliance centres. Dr. Rodell's opposition to or hesitancy in relation to introducing hepatitis B core antibody testing appears to be twofold. One, it said it would exclude only 50% of donors with AIDS prodrome, and secondly, it talks about the costs. There's a further document on the issue of the introduction of hepatitis B core antibody testing, and that is at ARMO 40138. So this is a letter of the 15th of March 1984 from Dr. Riddell to Dr. Duncan Thomas at the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control in London. And he says this: Dear Dr. Thomas, as a result of the December 1983 meeting of the FDA's Blood Products Advisory Committee, a study group was formed to consider the appropriateness of testing potential blood and/or plasma donors for core antibody to hepatitis B as an additional means of identifying members of high-risk groups associated with AIDS. The study group met on March the 6th, 1984, at which time each member presented views, information and data relative to the issue. So that's presumably a reference to the meeting that was discussed in the Cutter Memorandum. We felt it appropriate to issue a summary statement regarding our findings and conclusions in advance of a full report to be prepared in the near future. I'm enclosing a copy of the study group's interim summary statement and hope it will be helpful to you. And if we go over the page, we can see the summary statements authored by Dr. Riddell. The first paragraph refers to the meeting at which the issue of testing blood or donors for core antibody to hepatitis B was discussed. Paragraph 2 says the purpose of the meeting was to review all aspects and ramifications of the use of testing for anti-HBC as an additional means of determining whether potential donors were members of high-risk groups associated with AIDS. Although a full report of the study group's deliberations and conclusions will be furnished to the FDA in the near future, it was felt that an interim statement should be made available at this time. The study group was divided in its position on testing for anti-HBC as a means of identifying AIDS high-risk group members, with the majority believing that such testing was not appropriate for that purpose. However, members of the majority group indicated that they would likely be compelled to follow suit if any of the organisations represented initiated anti-HBC testing programmes. And then there are various further matters set out, including in the last paragraph, suggestions for some pilot studies. And then I think we can pick up consideration of matters relating to donor screening at ARMO 40425. This is a letter dated the 14th of August 1985 from Dr. Riddell to Dr. Peter Jones, and it's part of the bigger saga of seroconversions in relation to treatment with heat-treated factor VIII. And we can see Dr. Riddell saying, I've been requested to respond to your letter. We'll look at all the underlying correspondence in November. Dr. Riddell says, in my capacity as designated responsible head of Armour Pharmaceutical Company to the US FDA, I'm directly involved in issues associated with plasma collection and processing. And then if we go over the page, we can see in the top paragraph, Dr. Riddell saying this, picking it up in the 5th line, although testing for anti-HTLV3 is not mandatory in the US, our Plasma Alliance subsidiary implemented system-wide testing of each donation of plasma very shortly after the availability of the test. Units of plasma found to be positive for anti-HTLV3 are not used in the manufacture of clotting factor concentrates, and donors of these units are permanently deferred from further participation in our plasma programs. In addition, the donor education programs that we implemented in 1982, that is presumably a reference to the posters in December 1982 and then the subsequent February 1983 procedures, designed to discourage members of high-risk groups from participating in plasma donation programs, have been augmented and are still in place. It's not clear what's meant by reference to them being augmented, either in terms of how they were augmented or the date of augmentation. And then we can see, if we pick it up in the 3rd paragraph, Dr. Riddell says, in your letter to Mr. Miller, you requested specific information on the movement of plasma and plasma products internationally. Armour Pharmaceutical Company has never utilised plasma collected outside the continental United States in the production of clotting factor concentrates, nor do we intend to in the future. Additionally, for the manufacture of clotting factor concentrates, Armour has not used plasma collected from cities in the US designated by the CDC as high-risk AIDS areas. A listing of the centre location of our subsidiary Plasma Alliance is attached. And then there's a reference to the conference that we know Dr. Jones was organising in relation to AIDS, February 1986, and an offer is made by Dr. Riddell that information could be provided. And then it said at the bottom of the page, equally, Mr. Bishop from our UK operation would be pleased to help you with the organisation of the Congress. The Plasma Alliance Centre's location are then listed on the following page. I'm not going to read them out. Sorry, the page after that. We can see them there set out. And then, there's obviously a lot more to the involvement of Dr. Jones in the context of bringing to the fore the issue of seroconversions from heat-treated factor VIII, but we'll explore that in more detail in November. Can I just then pick up some references to pool sizes? So we saw the figures from 1976. We saw the figure in July 1981 in that publication of approximately 2,000 donors, described, I think, as effectively as a small pool. If we then go to BAYP 0004375, this is now January of 1983. It's a letter dated the 21st of January 1983 from a senior vice president at Alpha to Qatar, and it refers to a meeting which was held on the 14th of January 1983, and there's a list of those in attendance at the meeting. It includes Bob Johnson, Armour, but you'll see representatives of the major pharmaceutical companies all involved. And we can see it said the purpose of the meeting was to develop an industry position related to AIDS. The following was agreed to, various matters set out that I don't need to trouble you with. But if we go to the second page, there's a reference to issues of batch sizes, as it's described in the second paragraph. Any attempt to reduce batch sizes of AHF was considered ineffective because haemophiliacs receive product representing hundreds of thousands of donors during the year, regardless of batch size. Also, so little is known regarding the effect of dilution that a batch size reduction could conceivably have a detrimental effect. Finally, batch size reduction could have serious negative repercussion on productive availability and most especially on cost. cryoprecipitate, which is the ultimate in batch size reduction, is felt to be at best a delaying action since it can so substantially alter the lifestyle of haemophiliacs. Again, that's a discussion that we'll need to come back to, but there's a reference there in the context of developing an industry position. And then, if we go to ARMO 40242, this is a short telex from Mr. Bishop, so Armour UK, dated the 27th of April 1983, to a number of, well, it's addressed to Anita Bester, but then there are a number of people copied into it. And its subject is AIDS Armour policy. And it says this: further to our telecon 26th of April, I would confirm that the circular sent by Travellon and Cutter to the UK Haemophilia Centre directors are on their way to you. That sent by Alpha will be following shortly under separate cover. I would like to emphasise the urgency of a similar definitive statement from our own operation along similar lines, together with a more simplified statement which can be passed on to the increasing number of UK haemophiliacs who are beginning to ask questions of their individual centres. And then this: I understand that Ingo Regier will be discussing this with you in detail. I should like to receive your recommended circular, painting as positive a picture as possible and emphasising our small batch / donor pool sizes. So that appears to be, and again, it's a document we can ask Mr. Bishop about in due course, a characterisation of the Armour pool size as being small. Whether that's by way of comparison with others or not is unclear from the document. We then, in terms of discussion of pool sizes, move to 1986 and ARMO 40501. This is a document dated the 5th of March 1986. It's an inter-office memorandum from Mr. Christie to Dr. Harris, and it refers to a meeting with the Department of Health on Factor 8, heat-treated 3rd of March 1986. So this is part of the series of communications between the department and Armour concerning possible seroconversions from heat-treated Factor 8. For present purposes, the salient paragraph is the second paragraph under the heading manufacturing process, where it says this: we were asked the size of our donor pool, which is defined as between 5,000 and 20,000 donors. And then there is a suggested calculation in relation to what's described as the maximum virus challenge. Now, why those figures appear in circumstances where very much smaller figures have earlier been used is currently unclear.
There may be a question about the use of the word pool. I can see, it's a possibility, I'm not passing any comment on it, I can see that donor pool may refer to the number of repeat donors who are, if you like, on the books. The pool of donors, as opposed to the way in which we have been interpreting this as the pool of plasma from which the product is then made. It's a possibility.
Yes, it is. Unfortunately, I don't think any of the individuals who were present at the meeting are individuals that we're going to be able to ask about this issue. So I don't think we can cast any further light on it, but other than your attention.
Although I can see that possibility, it may perhaps be the less likely of the two in the context, because the context goes on to talk about pool in the last sentence. And there, the pool really only makes sense if it is the pool of plasma from which product is made.
Yes.
So it's difficult to think that the author would switch from one meaning of pool of donors, to another meaning of pool of donated plasma, in the same paragraph.
Yes, I'm just looking to see whether there's anything further in this document which casts light on it, but I don't think there is. There is then, towards the bottom of the page, a repetition of all plasmapheresis centres being in areas of low risk for AIDS and all the centres being Armour's own centres.
I mean, on the question of pool, again, there's a paragraph above that.
Yeah.
The risk of potential positive donations to a pool, and that must be a pool of plasma from which manufacture is made.
That would appear logically and linguistically to be correct, sir.
So unless there's actual positive evidence that donor pool means the number of donors, I'm inclined, but I'm open to submission on it in due course, to think that it is referring to the manufacturing plasma pool.
Yes, the only other reference to pool that I can see is top of page 3, but that's looking at a specific pool of plasma which contained a donation from an individual who subsequently developed AIDS. And the issue of that particular infected batch and what was done in relation to it is an issue we're going to be looking at in more detail in November.
But if it's 5 to 20,000 donors feeding into a pool, it's a large pool.
Yes.
Much larger than the earlier references.
Yes. I mean, certainly we've not, I think, uncovered any other documentation which suggests that the pool sizes were of that magnitude for Armour. Having said that, all the documentation upon which we're relying is, I think, it's all Armour-generated documentation. So I don't think we have anything which, outside of Armour's own publications, addresses the issue of pool sizes, at least not contemporaneously. If I can then just deal very briefly with the question of the collection of plasma from prisons. And I think the document here is CGRA 40545. Again, this is a Cutter document. It's described in terms of its subject as referring to a fractionator meeting April the 12th, 1985. If we go to the second page, we can see the heading Prison Plasma. And it says this subject elicits even more diverse viewpoints. Cutter and Alpha believe that science has progressed to the point that we can screen this plasma through testing, HTLV3, etc., and we now heat treat the products. Highland says they have no current prison plasma sources, and there's an exclamation mark in brackets. And Armour states they will never have any. And then it goes. I'll read the whole paragraph out, although that's the only reference to Armour. Riley is perpetually gloomy on the entire subject and feels we're destined to fail. Nevertheless, we agree to hang together for a try with the FDA. We will propose to begin using prison plasma cryo and abandon our gentleman's agreement. Unless the FDA takes issue and threatens regulatory action, we will further agree to do whatever testing the FDA deems necessary to answer any academic concerns. Picking it up in the penultimate sentence, the argument for using prison plasma is the additional testing, HTLV3, and heat treatment, which provides product safety. But in any event, what's said there to be Armour's position is they will never have any. It's not terribly illuminating, but it's...
Well, I think the will sounds more like an expression of determination.
Yes.
Than a prediction.
Yes. Whether it is intended as a comprehensive account of the past is impossible to say from the document. This is a meeting that was looking at whether prison plasma should now be used as at 1985, given the availability of testing. So it probably doesn't help in any understanding as to the past position. I should say we've not seen any contemporaneous documents or any primary source documents to demonstrate Armour collecting or using plasma collected in prisons. So I've drawn this to your attention, sir, because it's a passing reference to prison plasma.
And in the plasma news, or whatever it was, whatever the title of the document was you showed us earlier, the objective presentation, or presentation which aimed to be objective, written by on behalf of Armour, which exhibited Peter Jones's comments on his visit. The photograph on the top left-hand side, which I drew your attention, that I think says that we don't take plasma from people who circumstances show a hard life, words to that effect.
Yes.
But words which I thought, when I saw them, would suggest that any prison donations would be excluded on that basis, if it's accurate.
Yes. I think the only, and question mark is probably putting it too high, the only slight gap in information is the question of whether at all times, at least from the late 1970s onwards, once Armour had acquired Plasma Alliance, whether they were able to obtain all the plasma they required for fractionation from the Plasma Alliance centres, which don't appear to have included any prison locations, or whether there were ever occasions in which they drew or obtained plasma from non-Plasma Alliance centres, which, although US-based and FDA-licensed, might not have precluded the collection of prison plasma. But there is no, I should put it this way, I think probably, there's no positive evidence that we have seen which suggests prison plasma being used by Armour in the period of time with which the documents are concerned.
Thank you.
The last issue, just in relation to donors and the screening of donations, is the just if I can just touch on, and again, then defer for a more detailed consideration in November, the issue of screening donors for HTLV3. So there are just, I think, 3 or 4 documents from 1986 that I'll briefly refer to. If we start at ARMO 40496, this is described as a report of a meeting held in Fort Washington to discuss Factor VIII on the 27th of February 1986. A number of people present, including, we'll see, Dr. Riddell. And then the document at the bottom is dated the 28th of February 1986. It's, I think, probably from Dr. Harris, and it's copied to Mr. Christie and Mr. Bishop. So it's sent to Armour UK, although it's a meeting that takes place in the States. And then we can see in the first main paragraph, the meeting reviewed on a case-by-case basis every instance of seroconversion that's been reported anywhere in the world. And again, that's the issue we'll come back to. And if we pick it up about 6 lines down, the net result of these discussions was that, in the opinion of everyone at the meeting, there is no problem with Factor VIII drawn from unscreened donors. So that's donors not screened for HTLV3. However, it was felt that, just as with any ongoing improvements which have been made with Factor VIII, adding the screening to the donor pool is an improvement to the product, and we should first of all withhold from distribution all non-screened product under one stipulation. This is that withholding that non-screened product does not result in patients being unable to obtain a product or the potency they want when they order, or hospitals or physicians not being able to have access to the particular product that they've designated for the use of specific patients. In other words, the meeting felt that there were no reason to believe that there was a problem with non-screened product, but at least in theory, by screening, we will improve that product even more, and we should do as much as we can to implement these improvements as quickly as possible. And then the last paragraph, no, actually, I should read the whole document, I think. In the meantime, it was considered that there was no reason to cause any problems in terms of the normal day-to-day delivery of Factor 8 to our customers, etc., based on all the information available to date. In terms of the US and UK and everybody else who has non-screened product in inventory, we will continue to withhold the distribution of that product as long as or unless we only have that type of product to distribute within the market. In other words, it is a voluntary withholding and not a withdrawal from the market. And then the next paragraph, the meeting agreed that it was very important to gear up production in Kankakee and to, as rapidly as possible, be in the position where not only will we not be distributing product from non-screened donors, but that we will reach a point where, without interrupting the supply to the patient, we can exchange unscreened product with material that has already been screened. So it's a slightly tortuous account of discussion. I don't mean that in a critical sense. But
who is this addressed to?
I am not sure, I'm afraid, sir. It's an internal document. It's the very top of the page refers to a telephone conversation, PAG/CB/Anita Besler, 28th of February, and then it's report of a meeting held in Fort Washington, 27th of February, and we see those who attended. Bottom of the page, it's CC to Mr. Christie and Mr. Bishop, who are Armour UK. I'm not sure whether PAH, I'd assumed, was probably Dr. Harris, who's Armour UK, and I can't remember, but I might be wrong. I can't remember what, well, I'm not sure I know who the initials LEW stand for. So it appears to be an internal document, and it's being provided, amongst others, perhaps only to Mr. Christie and Mr. Bishop, to inform them of what's being discussed in the States.
And the curiosity of it is that it's proposing to introduce a screening which is bound to be expensive. It's proposing to not effectively to recall or withhold batches which have not been screened, which is going to be expensive and lead to the loss of product already manufactured, all on the basis that there's no evidence that it has any effect at all, which is just makes me curious about the document.
Yes. Well, it may be that Mr. Bishop will be able to assist us with it, although, of course, he's not the author of the document itself and was not a participant in the meeting. And then there is, of course, a proviso or stipulation, which is that withholding that non-screen product doesn't result in patients being unable to obtain the product or hospital or physicians not being able to have access to the particular product. So it contemplates, I think, the possibility that there might be circumstances in which the unscreened product might...
Well, it does, but the overriding message is we're going to carry out something which is going to be expensive in more than one way, which we have no reason to believe will make any make any improvement.
Yes.
Apart from the show of it.
There are then a handful of other documents on the same topic. So if we go in chronological order to the 13th of March of 1986, so the following month, PJON 5034_022. This is a letter dated the 13th of March 1986. It's from Dr. P. Harris, Medical and Technical Director at Armour Pharmaceutical Company Limited. This is a version addressed to Dr. Jones, but we have also a version which suggests that it was sent more widely to haemophilia centre directors. I think we can pick it up. It deals in large measure with issues about viral inactivation, but we can pick it up in the last paragraph on that page, where it said, as you may already know, all our plasma collection centres are situated in the American Midwest, away from the known areas of high risk for AIDS. Our typical donor is a multiple visitor and undergoes thorough medical examination and follow-up at each attendance. Each donation is now specifically screened for HTLV3 antibody, and all product being supplied is donor tested. And then top of the next page, before donor testing, it was estimated that the risk of including an HTLV3 contaminated donation in a plasma pool was from 0.25 to 0.3%. By introduction of our donor testing, it may be assumed that this risk has been minimised. However, it should not be overlooked that there may be material in centres or in the home that is not derived from donors tested for anti-HTLV3. We do appreciate that this information would aggravate the potential for distress to the haemophiliac because of the patient's inference that non-donor tested material may be less safe with regard to the AIDS risk. Further, we recognise that any decision to give a patient this information rests with you as the unit director. And then the last paragraph explains I'm sending this letter to UK haemophilia centre directors who are likely to have used Factor VIII in the preceding 12 months. There's then a letter from Dr. Jones, not to Armour, but to a fellow haematologist in Manchester Children's Hospital. That's at ARMO 40517. Oh, I'm sorry, Sherman, can I give you a different reference? HCDO 40271_075. So, as I say, it's from Dr. Jones to Dr. Evans at the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. Again, it's part of the bigger issue of seroconversions from heat-treated Factor VIII. But on the issue of individual donor testing, in the second paragraph, Dr. Jones says this, picking it up in the second line, the really worrying thing to me is that there is evidence that there are still concentrates being used which have been derived from plasma which has not been individually donor tested. This I know to be true of the Armour product, but I suspect that it might also be true of other commercial concentrates as well. And then it goes on to discuss a range of other matters. And then, if we go to ARMO 40554, we can see a letter dated the 11th of July 1986. Again, this is from Dr. Harris of Armour Pharmaceutical Limited in the UK to a Dr. Mustafa at a hospital in Darlington. And it says this, I wrote on the 13th of March to all UK haemophilia centre directors who were considered likely to have used Factor VIII heat treated during the preceding 12 months. That's the letter that we've already looked at. And then the next paragraph, on the 23rd of June 1986, however, our American parent company wrote to all US-based blood bank directors and or haemophilia treatment coordinators, recommending to them the return for exchange any non-donor tested material. In line with our corporate policy and having obtained the agreement of the DHSS, I'm now recommending the return of all non-donor tested Factor VIII so that we can exchange this for material manufactured from screened donations. Would you please review your stocks of heat-treated Factor VIII, including that issued for home treatment? And if you have any from the batches listed over leaf, please return these to Armour Pharmaceutical Company Limited. These will be exchanged for donor-screened product. All Armour material supplied in the UK since January 1986 has been donor screened. So that's what is said in July of 1986. Again, it's an issue we'll need to come back to, but you'll see there the statement that's made of all Armour material supplied to the UK since January 1986 being donor screened. The meeting, which was the first meeting we looked at in relation to this issue, was a meeting 27th of February 1986.
The Fort Washington meeting?
The Fort Washington meeting. Now, that doesn't mean that the statement that all Armour materials supplied in the UK since January 1986 has been donor screened is incorrect or inaccurate. but we will need to come back to this to see whether we can bottom out in more detail the correct factual position. The final document that I just wanted to draw to your attention on the issue of donors is CGRA 40570. So the date of this is the 25th of July 1986, and it's a memo from Dr. Harris, we've got the heading now, Aurora Healthcare Limited, to Mr. Thomas, copied to various people, including Mr. Bishop and Mr. Christie and Dr. Riddell. Again, what's set out in this first page is something we'll be coming back to. But if we go to the second page, we can see a paper headed Review of Factor VIII Products with Respect to Possible Freedom from Viral Contamination. Factor VIII Heat-Treated Armour, and then we've got the particular heat treatment method, 60 degrees centigrade for 30 hours. And then some additional observations. A, our own collection centres away from known high-risk areas. B, donor education. C, pre-donation screen by questioning and physical examination. And then this, unfortunately, experience has shown that prospective donors do not always tell the truth. So that's an observation worth flagging up. There is then a more detailed discussion in this document about seroconversions from heat-treated concentrates. And if we go to... No, in fact, there's nothing which casts any particular further light on the position in relation to donors. I think we'll pick up the rest of this document in November. So that completes the theme in relation to donors. The next issue in relation to Armour that I want to pick up is issues about communication of risk and looking at some of the product labels and data sheets. And we can perhaps do that at 2 o'clock.
Yes, well, let's take a break now till 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock.